He sat there frozen, phone pressed to his ear, eyes darting between the angry faces around the glass table, and in that moment, with millions in the bank and power in every corner of the city, he felt smaller than he ever had in his life, because the words flying at him were not his language, not his world, and the silence inside him was louder than the boardroom itself, and no one noticed the quiet courier standing by the door, wearing an orange jacket, backpack still on her shoulders, waiting patiently as if she had learned long ago that being invisible was safer than being seen, and the millionaire's sadness was not dramatic or loud, it was heavy and sinking, because this deal was everything, it was his last chance to save a company built by his father, and without a translator he was helpless, completely exposed in front of men who smiled politely while circling him like sharks, and they knew it, they spoke fast on purpose, they laughed softly, they used legal words that cut deeper than insults, and he could only nod, pretending to understand, pretending to belong, while inside his chest something broke slowly, piece by piece, and the chairman across from him leaned back with arrogant ease, fingers steepled, eyes cold, a man used to winning without effort, a man who enjoyed watching others drown quietly, and when the millionaire finally tried to speak, his accent betrayed him, his grammar stumbled, and the room filled with a thin, cruel silence, followed by restrained smiles, because power loves moments like this, moments where money cannot buy dignity, and helplessness wrapped around him like a tight coat, making it hard to breathe, making his hands shake under the table, and he thought of calling the meeting off, of walking away, of losing everything with what little pride he had left, but then he remembered his employees, thousands of families, people who trusted his name, and that memory planted a small, quiet hope inside him, fragile but alive, and so he stayed silent again, listening, waiting, enduring, while the powerful men continued, confident, untouchable, rewriting clauses, shifting blame, pushing him toward a corner he could not see, and time slowed, every second stretching, until the door opened softly, and the courier stepped forward, apologizing for interrupting in a calm, almost timid voice, saying she needed a signature, and the chairman waved her off impatiently, irritated that someone so small dared to exist in his space, but she did not leave, she hesitated, then looked at the millionaire, and in that look there was recognition, the kind that comes from shared humiliation, from knowing what it feels like to be underestimated, and in a low voice she said, "Excuse me, they are misleading you," and the room froze, because she did not say it in English, she said it in perfect Mandarin, and the chairman's smile faltered for the first time, and before anyone could react, she continued, calmly translating the last 10 minutes word for word, exposing every hidden condition, every trap, every insult disguised as politeness. Then she switched to French, then German, then Arabic, then Spanish, her voice steady, respectful, precise, 6 languages flowing like they had lived inside her forever, and the sadness in the millionaire's chest cracked open, replaced by disbelief, then by a cautious, trembling hope, because for the first time that day, someone was on his side, and the powerful men shifted in their seats, their arrogance leaking away, replaced by confusion, then irritation, because power hates being understood, and the chairman raised his voice, demanding to know who she was, and she answered simply, "A courier, nothing more, someone who listens, someone who learned languages while delivering food, while cleaning offices, while sleeping 4 hours a night in a shared room, someone who was told again and again to stay quiet, to know her place, and she had, until now." And the millionaire finally spoke again, slowly, clearly, with her translating every word, and patience became his weapon, because now he could wait, now he could choose his words, now the balance had shifted, and the men who once laughed now argued among themselves, their influence cracking under the light of clarity, and clause by clause, the truth came out, the unfair terms, the deliberate confusion, the attempt to steal control without resistance, and one by one, their arguments collapsed, until the chairman slammed his hand on the table, anger replacing elegance, and that was the moment justice arrived, not loud, not violent, but undeniable, because the millionaire stood up, thanked them politely, declined the deal, and informed them that the recording of the meeting, legally translated, would be shared with the international board, and the room fell silent, not the cruel silence from before, but a heavy, final one, and as he walked out with the courier beside him, the powerful men remained seated, suddenly small in their expensive chairs, and outside, in the quiet hallway, the millionaire stopped, looked at her, And for the first time that day, his voice did not shake. He thanked her, not as a savior, but as an equal, and she nodded, adjusting her backpack, ready to leave, because she did not expect rewards, only respect. But justice has a way of lingering, and weeks later, when the story spread quietly through corporate circles, when deals were questioned and power checked, the Courier received a call, not as a favor, but as an offer, and the millionaire, once desperate, now patient, now steady, made sure her voice would never be ignored again. And the world did not change overnight, but in one glass building, on one ordinary day, sadness had turned into strength, helplessness into clarity, and a quiet person had reminded everyone that language is power, and dignity belongs to those who endure long enough to be heard. The days after that meeting were slow and heavy, not triumphant, not celebratory, because justice does not rush, it waits, and the millionaire returned to his office carrying both relief and fear. Relief because the trap had been exposed, fear because powerful men do not forgive easily. And he knew that rejecting them would bring consequences, silent ones at first, delayed ones later, and the Courier went back to her routine, early mornings, long walks, cold elevators, polite smiles that were never returned, her 6 languages folded back inside her like a secret she had learned not to share, and sadness followed her quietly, not sharp, just constant, because doing the right thing does not always feel heroic, sometimes it just feels lonely. And the helplessness returned when her contract was suddenly reduced, when orders stopped coming, when supervisors avoided her eyes, and she understood without being told that influence had reached down to her level, and she accepted it with patience, because she had lived her whole life knowing that standing up once does not mean you are safe forever. And meanwhile the millionaire faced his own slow punishment, deals postponed, calls unanswered, invitations withdrawn, smiles replaced with polite distance, and the board questioned him, gently but firmly, asking if pride had clouded his judgment, asking if walking away had been worth it, and at night he sat alone in his office, lights off, city glowing outside, wondering if silence would have been easier, if humiliation would have been cheaper than resistance, and yet, somewhere under the weight, quiet hope remained, because truth had been spoken, because he was no longer alone in knowing it, and patience became his shield, not fighting back, not accusing, just waiting, gathering documents, reviewing clauses, building a case with calm precision, while the chairman who once laughed now moved faster, pushing mergers through, pressuring regulators, using influence like armor, confident that time would erase one uncomfortable meeting, and weeks passed, then months, until the unexpected happened, not loudly, not publicly, but deeply, because a junior analyst, inspired by whispers of that meeting, leaked documents, and another did the same, and suddenly patterns emerged, hidden manipulations across borders, the same language tricks, the same confusion weaponized, and journalists began asking careful questions, and regulators began listening carefully, and the Courier, now delivering fewer packages, received an email from an unknown sender, thanking her for her courage, asking if she would be willing to translate, officially, confidentially, and her hands trembled as she read it, not from excitement, but from fear, because stepping forward again meant risking everything again, and sadness returned briefly, followed by helplessness, the memory of how easily she had been pushed aside, but then quiet hope rose, steady and warm, because this time she would not be alone, and she replied simply, yes. And when the investigation finally opened, slow and methodical, when interviews were conducted and recordings reviewed, her voice filled rooms she had never been allowed to enter before, clear, calm, undeniable, and the chairman watched from his high office as influence failed him for the first time, as calls went unanswered, as power slipped not with drama but with certainty, and on the day the findings were announced, there were no cheers, no applause, just a quiet press release, fines, removals, reforms, and the millionaire read it alone, feeling not victory, but peace, because justice had arrived the way it always does when it is real, slowly, patiently, without asking for permission. When the news settled and the noise faded, life did not suddenly become bright or easy. It became honest, and that honesty carried its own weight, because the millionaire was called into rooms where voices were calmer now, more careful, where people listened instead of circling, yet he still felt the echo of those months of pressure, the nights of doubt, the quiet fear that standing still might cost him everything, and he carried that memory like a scar, not to show it, but to remember what silence almost took from him, and the Courier, now officially listed as a linguistic consultant, sat in rooms that once would have frightened her, hands folded, back straight, speaking only when asked, because patience had shaped her, taught her that strength does not rush to prove itself, and still, sadness lingered, because respect came slowly, because some people still looked at her jacket before her words, and injustice does not disappear, it only changes shape, and there were moments when she questioned herself again, when she wondered if being invisible had been safer, if the attention was a new kind of risk, and the powerful men who had fallen were replaced by others, quieter, more cautious, but no less ambitious, and the system moved on, pretending it had learned, while testing its limits again, and helplessness brushed against them both in different ways, him when approval stalled for reasons no one explained, her when her recommendations were repeated by louder voices and praised as someone else's idea, and yet, beneath that familiar frustration, something different existed now, a shared quiet hope, because they had seen the pattern break once, and patience had worked, and so they waited again, documenting, observing, choosing when to speak and when to let silence do the work, and then one evening, after a long day of hearings and translations, they found themselves alone in a near-empty cafeteria, city lights reflecting on glass, and for the first time they talked not about contracts or languages, but about exhaustion, about growing up learning to lower your voice, about realizing too late that survival skills can become chains, and in that conversation, something shifted, not romantically, not dramatically, but deeply, because mutual respect turned into trust, and trust turned into resolve, and when a new international proposal appeared, one that mirrored the old tricks with softer words and friendlier faces, they recognized it immediately, sadness touched them briefly, helplessness tried to return, but hope was already awake this time, patient and alert, and together they prepared, not as a billionaire and a courier, but as two people who understood how power hides, and when the meeting came, she spoke first, calmly outlining the structure, translating intent before language, and the room listened, not because she was loud, but because clarity is hard to ignore, and the influential figures exchanged glances, realizing this would not be easy, realizing the old methods would not work here, and for the first time, justice did not arrive at the end, it stood quietly in the room from the beginning, waiting. The final meeting did not feel dramatic, it felt calm, almost ordinary, and that was how the millionaire knew something had changed, because power usually announces itself with noise, but this time it arrived with restraint, and as he sat at the table, listening through clear, honest translation, he felt the last traces of that old sadness loosen their grip, not disappear, just soften, because memories do not vanish, they teach, and across from him the new executive spoke carefully, aware now that every word would be understood exactly as it was meant, and the courier, no longer wearing orange, no longer carrying a backpack, spoke with the same steady tone she had always had, because dignity had never been about clothing, and when the discussion ended, the agreement was fair, not generous, not cruel, simply balanced, and that balance felt like emotional justice, the kind that does not humiliate the guilty but protects the vulnerable, and as signatures were placed, no one smiled broadly, no one celebrated, because real justice is quiet, and when the doors opened and sunlight filled the room, the millionaire felt something he had not felt in years, relief without fear, success without shame, and later, when reporters asked about the change in his company's culture, he spoke briefly, saying they had learned the value of listening, and when they asked her about her journey, she did not tell a dramatic story, she simply said she learned to be patient, and patience had finally been answered, and months passed, and the world moved on, but inside that building, meetings slowed, translators were respected, contracts were written clearly, and voices once ignored were given space, and one evening, as the city lights came on again, the millionaire stood by the window, remembering the day he felt small, and instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude, because humiliation had led him to humility, and across the hall, she closed her laptop, finished her work, and left on time, walking out not as a symbol, not as a miracle, but as a person who had been heard, and in that ordinary ending, there was something powerful, because injustice had not been defeated by force, but by patience, clarity, and the courage of someone who spoke when silence was easier.